I started to say something, but George shouted, "That's not all. That's not the worst part of it." It seemed almost out of his mind in Korea. In Korea, one of those battles we had, I thought the enemy was in a building, and I took 2 grenades and I threw them in the building. And the next day when we examined the building, we went in and said there were 2 nuns there and 23 children. Said the body parts, the arms, the legs, the head was every place. He said scattered all over. He looked like a wild man. You see now, preacher, why it's too easy. It's too easy. I'm a murderer and a monster. He seemed startled when I agreed with him. I said, "Yes, George, you must be punished." He stared at me in unbelief, as if he couldn't understand that I agreed with him. "You mean I must be punished by being sent to hell? Hell would be too good for me. I'm a murderer and a monster." He said, "You're right, George. Your sins must be paid for." You see, George said, why what you're saying doesn't apply to me. You make salvation too easy. My sins must be punished. What you say is too easy. My sins must be punished. I deserve to be sent to hell. God wouldn't be just. He wouldn't be a just God if my sins were not punished. "You're right, George," I replied. A look of shock came over George's face. He seemed speechless. I continued, "Your sins must be paid for. You do deserve to go to hell." "You see," interrupted George with a loud voice. I continued, "Listen to me carefully, George," as I continued quoting Romans 5 and 8. "God commended his love toward us, toward you, George, in that while we were yet sinners, while you were yet a sinner, he died for you. He died in your place." Jesus died for you, George. He died in your place. The wages or pay of your sins is death. Jesus paid that death by becoming a sinner, by taking all your sins upon himself. He became George, a murderer and a monster, in order to satisfy God's holy demand for your sins, that they had to be punished. He loved you that much. It seems like God opened his mind and he realized that God had paid for his sins by dying, that Jesus had took upon himself all of those killings and all of the bad things. And so he cried out to God and said, "God, please forgive me, save me, accept the death of Jesus as payment for my sins." And as soon as this happened, it seemed like a great weight was lifted off his shoulders, and he began to weep for joy. And he was so happy and thrilled. And I met many people since then with the same kind of pain George had. A woman that had aborted her little baby. She took one of my books, Healing Words for Hurting People, and she said she'd go to this counselor, she'd go to this doctor, she'd do everything they told her to do. Then she read the instructions of how to forgive herself, the fact that God had forgiven her, that that Jesus actually had taken the place as her substitute of aborting her own baby. A woman howled every night, her guilty conscience, because she aborted the only baby she could have. My dear friend, even though you feel like you're a murderer and a monster, God has a perfect plan of deliverance for you. And we want to tell you about it. It's wonderful. It's real. May God bless you.